It is 3 in the afternoon. Your energy is gone. Your hand is already reaching for something sweet before your brain has finished asking why. You tell yourself it is a modern problem, a willpower problem, a world full of junk food problem. But the real answer is far stranger. Your craving for sugar did not start in a vending machine. It did not start in a candy factory or a soda commercial or even in a farmer's field. It started millions of years ago, inside the body of an ape you have never heard of during a climate disaster you were never taught about in school. And once you understand what actually happened back then, that afternoon slump stops looking like weakness. It starts looking like an inheritance passed down through more generations than you can picture. Start with a simple question. Why does anything taste sweet at all? Sweetness is not a neutral flavor. It is a signal, older than language, older than fire. In nature, sweet almost always means calories, and calories almost always meant survival. A tongue that could detect sugar in a piece of fruit, decades before modern chemistry existed, was a tongue attached to an animal that ate well and lived long enough to reproduce. An animal indifferent to sweetness often did not get that chance. So somewhere far back in the primate family tree, a taste for sugar became wired directly into the brain's reward system. Not as a treat, not as an indulgence, as a survival tool tested and kept because it worked. Think about what that actually means for a moment. Every time your brain lights up at the sight of something sweet, it is running a program that has already passed every possible test evolution could throw at it. It survived ice ages, it survived famines. It survived migrations across entire continents. That is not a small inheritance. That is a program with an unbroken track record stretching back further than most people can even imagine. Here's where the story gets strange. Richard Johnson, a professor of medicine at the University of Colorado, has spent years studying what he calls the fructose survival hypothesis. Fructose is one of the 2 simple sugars your body pulls apart from ordinary table sugar, alongside glucose. Glucose is used almost immediately, burned for quick energy the moment it enters your bloodstream. Fructose behaves very differently. It gets converted into fat, almost as if the body is preparing for a famine that has not happened yet. Johnson's research points to a period roughly 15 million years ago, when the planet was cooling and the ancestors of great apes faced long stretches without reliable food. Forests shrank, fruit became harder to find. And during that harsh stretch of time, a genetic mutation appeared in these early apes. It disabled an enzyme called uricase, whose ordinary job is to break down a byproduct of fructose metabolism called uric acid. Losing that enzyme sounds like a defect. On the surface, it looks like something went wrong. It did not. Without uricase working properly, uric acid began building up in the blood after eating fruit. And that buildup, oddly enough, made the body even more efficient at converting fructose into stored fat. In a world where the next meal was never guaranteed, an ancestor who turned fruit into fat faster had a genuine edge. More stored energy meant a better chance of surviving the next drought, the next cold season, the next stretch of scarcity that could last for weeks. In other words, the same broken gene that today contributes to gout, kidney stones, and high blood pressure once helped a starving ape survive a hostile, changing world. Does that sound backwards to you? It should. Nature does not build for comfort. It builds for survival, and it does not care what happens to that same design millions of years later in bodies living in a completely different world. This is not just one scientist's theory, sitting alone in a journal. Daniel Lieberman, an evolutionary biologist at Harvard University, describes sugar as a deep, deep ancient craving, one that runs far below conscious thought. He points out that hunting was never reliable. A hunter-gatherer might go days without meat, sometimes longer. But a craving for something sweet, something that pushed early humans toward ripe fruit and away from unripe, fiber-heavy plants, provided steady, dependable fuel in an unpredictable world. Lieberman has put it plainly. Imagine an early human who felt nothing when tasting something sweet. That person would not have bothered seeking out fruit. They would have eaten less, stored less fat, and had less energy to survive hard seasons and raise children. Meanwhile, the ones who felt a rush of pleasure from sugar kept coming back for more, kept eating, kept surviving, and kept passing that same craving forward. So the craving you feel today is not new. It is ancient. It is thousands of generations deep, encoded before written history, before agriculture, before cities. And it was never a mistake in the system. It was the system. Now walk the story forward. out of biology and into human behavior. You can actually picture long before farming, before villages, before anything resembling civilization, humans were already going to extreme lengths for something sweet. Not fruit this time, honey. In southeastern Spain, inside a limestone shelter called the Cuevas de la Araña, or spider caves, there is a painting roughly 8,000 years old. It shows a human figure dangling from ropes on a cliff face, reaching into a wild beehive, surrounded by painted dots meant to represent an angry, swirling swarm. Researchers call it the Man of Bicorp, and it is considered the oldest surviving image anywhere in the world of a human gathering honey. Picture that scene for a moment. No smoke to calm the bees, no protective clothing, no sturdy ladder, just ropes and nerve, and a body swaying above open air. A person hanging over a cliff edge, arm buried in a hive, while stinging insects cloud around exposed skin. Why would anyone risk that for a handful of honeycomb? Because honey was quite simply one of the most calorie-dense, immediately rewarding foods available anywhere in the natural world. Manuel Bia, a researcher at the University of Zaragoza who studies rock art across this region, has described honey as one of the most nutritious foods found in nature, and also one of the rare foods that was genuinely unmistakably sweet. He also points out something easy to miss at first glance. These paintings were not just recording a practical food source. They carried symbolic weight, commemorating the danger the climbers faced simply to get it. In 2013, archaeologists found another honey-gathering scene near Castellote, in a rock shelter called Barranco Gomez, dated to roughly 7,500 years ago. It shows the same behavior in even finer, more careful detail. Jean Kritsky, a scientist who studies the long history of bees and human interaction, has noted how vividly these images capture the honey hunter suspended above a wild nest, fully exposed to the swarm below, with nothing between skin and stinger but open air. These were not farmers yet. Many of the people who left these paintings were still hunter-gatherers, living alongside early agricultural neighbors who were only just beginning to grow grain nearby. And even as farming slowly spread across the region, honey hunting continued for thousands of years afterward. Because nothing else on offer tasted quite like it. Here's the part worth sitting with. This was not a rare or occasional behavior, confined to one culture or one cave wall. It shows up again and again across separate rock art traditions, from Spain to southern Africa, each one independently arriving at the same conclusion without ever contacting one another. Sweetness was worth the danger, every single time, and honey was not just hunted, it was hoarded, preserved, and even buried with the dead. Archaeologists have found jars of honey inside Egyptian tombs, sealed for over 3,000 years, and still technically edible when opened. Honey almost never spoils because it contains so little water that bacteria cannot survive inside it. Ancient people may not have understood the chemistry behind that fact, but they clearly understood the result. They packed honey into burial chambers meant to last forever. They used it to preserve fruit, to preserve meat for long journeys, and eventually to make mead, a fermented honey drink that may be one of the oldest alcoholic beverages ever produced by human hands. Pottery residue nearly 9,000 years old, found in ancient China, shows traces of a fermented mixture of honey, rice, and fruit. Halfway around the world, with no contact between these cultures, people were reaching the exact same conclusion. Something this valuable deserved to be saved, stretched and turned into more than a single afternoon's pleasure. Does that surprise you? It should not. Not once you see the pattern. Wherever humans found something sweet, they built rituals, risks, and entire economies around keeping it close. Now, what about sugar itself? Not honey. The actual crop, sugarcane. That story starts even earlier than most people assume, and in a place most people would never guess. Genetic and archaeological evidence traces sugarcane's origins to Southeast Asia and the islands north of Australia, with some of the earliest cultivation linked to sites like Cook Swamp in Papua New Guinea, where related crops such as taro and banana were already being domesticated as far back as roughly 10,000 years ago. But here's the twist almost nobody expects. Sugarcane was not originally grown to be eaten as sugar. It was likely first used as animal feed, a way to fatten pigs before slaughter, while humans occasionally chewed the raw stalks for a sweet treat on the side, almost as an afterthought. The plant we now associate with candy bars and soda cans began its human relationship as fodder tossed to livestock, chewed almost by accident. From there, the crop slowly traveled, carried by people rather than wind or ocean current. Roughly 3,500 years ago, Austronesian and Polynesian seafarers carried sugarcane across the eastern Pacific and into the Indian Ocean, planting it island by island as they voyaged. It took thousands of years after its original domestication before anyone figured out how to turn the plant into something resembling refined sugar. That breakthrough happened in India, around 2,500 years ago, when people first learned to boil and crystallize sugarcane juice into a solid, storable form. Think about that timeline for a second. Millions of years of evolutionary craving. Thousands of years of honey hunting, cliff climbing, rope ladders, and stung fingers. And only 2,500 years of anything resembling the white sugar sitting in your kitchen cupboard right now. For almost the entire span of human existence, sugar was rare, dangerous to obtain, or strictly seasonal. Fruit ripened for only a few weeks a year. Honey required risking an angry swarm on an exposed cliff face. There was no drive-through window waiting nearby. There was no bag of candy sitting within arm's reach at all hours of the day and night. This is the counterintuitive twist, the part that reframes everything you have heard so far. The craving evolution built into you was never designed for a world of abundance. It was designed for a world of scarcity, where sweetness was a rare signal worth chasing. Every mechanism, the dopamine rush Lieberman describes the fat-storing shortcut, Johnson traces back 15 million years, the willingness to hang off a cliff for a piece of honeycomb, all of it assumed that sweet things would remain hard to find. All of it assumed you would have to work for it. Nobody switched off that ancient wiring when supermarkets appeared on the landscape. Nobody updated the software when sugar went from a rare seasonal treasure to a substance stocked on every shelf, packed into nearly every product, available at any hour, in nearly unlimited quantity, at a price low enough to ignore. The brain you carry today is still running instructions written for a world where a single piece of fruit might be the difference between surviving winter and not. Does that mean your afternoon craving is a flaw in your character? Not quite. It means your body is doing exactly what it was engineered to do inside an environment it was never engineered for, and was never given the chance to adjust to. This mismatch has a name among researchers who study evolutionary physiology. Reviews on the subject point out that the human body appears adapted to handle sugar only in its diluted, natural form. The kind found inside whole fruit, where fiber and water slow absorption and keep blood sugar levels steady and predictable. Concentrated, refined sugar, stripped of fiber and consumed quickly in liquid or powdered form, was simply never part of the environment that shaped your metabolism over those millions of years. Your biology adapted carefully to fruit. It never had the chance to adapt to a candy bar, because a candy bar has existed for barely a blink of evolutionary time. A fraction of a single percent of your species' history. So when you feel that pull towards something sweet after a stressful meeting or a bad night's sleep, or simply because 3 o'clock has arrived again, you're not failing some modern test of discipline. You're responding to a survival strategy that took millions of years to build, one that helped a starving ancestor store fat before a coming famine, one that once sent a person over a cliff edge for a single mouthful of honeycomb. Would you have climbed that cliff yourself if honey were the only sweetness you would ever taste that year? The difference is that the ancestor faced scarcity. You face abundance, almost everywhere you look. And an alarm system built for scarcity does not know how to quiet itself, just because the danger it once prepared for no longer exists in your daily life. Modern food companies did not invent your sweet tooth. They inherited it, studied it carefully, and built an entire global industry around satisfying it as efficiently and as constantly as possible. Every product engineered to hit what industry researchers call a bliss point, that precise level of sweetness that maximizes craving without ever fully triggering satisfaction, is really just modern science pulling the same lever your ancestors' biology installed millions of years earlier. The cliff face has been replaced by a checkout aisle. The risk has been replaced by convenience, packaging, and bright colors. The reward chemistry underneath, the dopamine, the craving, the pull, remains exactly the same as it was on that cave wall. Consider what that means for your own life, right now today. You did not choose to be born with a brain calibrated for scarcity. You did not choose to be raised in a world where sweetness is manufactured by the ton, shipped in trucks, and stacked within reach of every checkout line in every town. Your ancestors spent millions of years training a reward system to chase something rare. The modern food industry simply learned how to trigger that same system on command, using cheaper ingredients, brighter packaging, and far less effort than a rope ladder over a cliff. That is not an excuse to ignore how sugar affects your body today. Excess sugar still carries real consequences, from weight gain to metabolic strain. Exactly the kind of research Johnson and others have spent careers documenting. But it is a reason to stop treating every craving as a personal failure. A craving is not proof that something is wrong with you. It is proof that something very old is still running quietly in the background, doing the only job it was ever built to do. Here's the part worth carrying with you long after this ends. Understanding where a craving comes from does not make it disappear on command, but it does change its meaning entirely. The next time you reach for something sweet without quite knowing why, you're not glimpsing a personal weakness, some failure unique to you. You are glimpsing a piece of deep shared history, written into the body of every human who has ever lived, dating back to an ape enduring a cooling, hostile planet. A hunter dangling above an angry hive with nothing but rope and courage. A sailor carrying cane stalks across an unfamiliar ocean in search of something worth the entire voyage. It is 3 in the afternoon. Your energy is gone. Your hand is already reaching for something sweet before your brain has finished asking why. Now you know the real answer, and it turns out to be far stranger and far older than you ever expected it to be.